right. Good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you to the second annual Town Hall on Race hosted by the Department of Equity and Inclusion and your City of Raleigh core team. We are so elated that you are here today, that you're going to take a couple of hours out of your busy schedule to join us this morning for our annual event. We have some great presenters in store for you today. But before they present, we just want to go through uh, some welcome, some to get you engaged and to get you comfortable and familiar with some of the chat features that we're going to be using on today. So do what you need to take care of yourself. You are at home or in your office, you know where the bathroom is, you know where the fridge is. If you get a little hungry or your throat gets a little dry, you just need the thirst or quench for a little quench your thirst for a little moment there. You know where that is. But most importantly, we want you to stay engaged on today. We have two phenomenal speakers that are going to be presenting to us on today, and they have some great content, some great information, and we just want you to be engaged. And we want you to actively participate. There will be, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a section that says Q&A. That's where you're going to drop all of your questions at the end of each presentation or during their presentation. If something that they said dropped out to you, we want you to drop that into the Q&A box. And Lisa, who is our host, that will help me with technical, and Megan Anderson, who's going to also facilitate the questions after the end of their presentations. They will be able to see your questions, and then they will be able to help me on that aspect. And so the Q&A box is where you're going to put all your questions. So our learning environment, what is learned here leaves here. We know they're going to disseminate a whole bunch of information to you, but we want you to be able to share this with people in your community, share this information with those that are in your current workplaces, and we just want you to spread the word, to be comfortable, to talk and share the information that we share today. Today is a brave space. No one is going to cast judgment on someone, but we want you to feel comfortable enough talking about race, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is one mic, one conversation, so we're going to limit it to just that. And we're not going to have any other conversation about something that is off subject. We want to stay on subject because that's going to help that information that we receive on today. But also, we want you to know and expect that we will not have a lack of closure. This would never be an ending subject, unfortunately, although we all want it to be, but we know that there would not be closure. But what we want you to do is to accept the information that we have on today and start to making the change. We want to be intentional and we want to start that healing process, but we have to understand there will not be a closure after the end of today, because we know this information and we know that this topic is going to continue on. But we want you to listen for understanding. So if you don't know something, or if something needs a little more clarity, drop it in the Q&A box. That's what that is there for. And we have some great dynamic presenters here that can, in subject matter experts, that can actually answer those questions for you. And then too, we just want you to be able to know that we are here for you as part of the Department of Equity and Inclusion as well. So why do we talk about racial equity? We know that we live in a highly racialized society. So the very foundation that this country has biases is rooted in race. And so we know that some progress has been made over the years, but if you look at any measure of success in our income, education, health, criminal justice, etc., we know that significant differences in outcomes become based on race and remain deep and pervasive. So we're having these conversations today because of the organization's desire to be intentional about creating equitable outcomes where everyone can succeed. And we know that when we do that and we are all on the same page, we know that's how we can get things done. We have to work together. We have to be intentional, and not just being intentional, but beyond intention is the action behind it. We have as the city of Raleigh, within the last several months, we have been doing just that. We have been intentional in all things diversity, equity, and inclusion here, to normalize the conversations, to get you comfortable about talking about race. And we have been organizationalizing and we have been operationalizing as well too. We have been putting things in motion to keep that whole circle moving forward. And why did we choose the theme race and attention, healing the wound that will not heal itself? Well, we know intention is about something one intends to do, an aim or a plan. And also in the medical term, and it is the process of starting the healing process of that wound. And so that's where the race and attention, healing the wound that will not heal itself, that's where it derived from, because we have been so key and we've been so intentional about this work that we know one person cannot do it. We know that two people cannot do it. It takes a collective. And we know that talking about race, we know it rips the Band-Aid off and it exposes you. And wherever your makeup or your construct was when in your upbringing, we're going to deal with the roots on today. And we know that Dr. Moore is going to do just that in her presentation. She's going to really define what it is. She's really going to help us to put things into perspective. And Mr. Perry is also going to be doing the exact same thing, to where we can start looking from the lens of healing. Where do we go from here? After today, we want you to be able to say, I know the keys and I've been equipped with these successful tools to start this healing process in my sphere of influence. So today our theme is broken down into 3 different categories: race as we know it, race as we see it, and race as we learn it. And today we're going to be learning about race as we know it, and we want you to develop a shared analysis of the binary divisions, people of color, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we want you to gain awareness of the history of race. Where did all of this come from? Where did it start? How do we get here? That's pretty much going to be the emphasis on today, from race as we know it. And Dr. Moore is going to share with us today on race as we know it. And I'm sure she's going to bring it to us. And I'm excited. I hope that you are just as excited as I am. And I know she's excited as well. Race as we learn it. Mr. Perry is going to be sharing with us race as we learn it. But we want you to, from race as we learn it, we want you to develop a shared analysis of how race impacts our lives, the struggle that persists, and how we can overcome them. So we want you to really take a whole microscope and just really hone in on some of those struggles that you experienced in your childhood into where you are now. And he's going to put it all into perspective for us to really, so that we can really start to analyze where we came from and why we're here and what we can do to bridge that gap. And then race as we see it, we know that is for tomorrow category. Dr. Caesar is going to share with us tomorrow on race as we see it. And we want to understand how structural racism in the US exists with current examples in our healthcare systems. She's really going to lay it out for us, and she has data and visuals that's really going to put it all into perspective for us. And before we introduce Dr. Moore, we have a greeting from our city manager and our assistant city manager here today, and we're going to share with that real quick.
Hello, everyone. I am Marshall Adams-David, City Manager for the City of Raleigh. I'm so excited today to welcome you to the 2nd annual Raleigh Town Hall, Race and Intention, Healing the Wound That Will Not Heal Itself. This is important work, it's tough work, but it is work that we as a city and community share a deep commitment to. Joining me to talk about where we are and where we're going is Evan Raleigh. Evan joined the leadership team last year as an assistant city manager. Welcome, Evan.
Thank you, Marshall. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so grateful to be a member of this team. As one of your assistant city managers, I have the pleasure of working with several departments. The 2 most recent additions are the Office of Community Engagement and the Department of Equity and Inclusion. Related to equity and inclusion, we recently announced a new leader of that department, Dr. Artina Hamilton. Dr. Hamilton brings a wealth of multicultural competence and experience helping guide policy and programming to strengthen organizations.
We are pleased to welcome Dr. Hamilton to our team. She will help us build a more unified and more inclusive Raleigh. There are other important steps we have taken as an organization to encourage and normalize discussions about race and equity. We created the Equity Core Team with representation from every city department to advance inclusivity. An example, the core team has been charged with putting on today's town hall. This is meaningful work that we will all benefit from, so thank you.
Between March and November of 2021, nearly all City of Raleigh staff, almost 4,000 people, successfully completed a 4-hour training session. These Equity 101 interactive sessions were facilitated by staff and gave participants the opportunity to examine the history of race relations in our country and have candid conversations about their own personal experiences. It was important to us that this exercise not just check a box, but provide an opportunity for meaningful conversation and learning. We were pleased to receive so much positive feedback about these sessions. Many staff members were inspired to learn more and pursue a better understanding of issues surrounding race and inclusion in other areas of their lives, not just in the workplace.
These are important steps, and I am proud that our organization is having meaningful conversation around differences and ultimately similarities in what ties us together. Another great resource is our upcoming Equity Toolkit. It will help to evaluate internal biases in contracting. We want to ensure that we are reviewing internal hiring practices as well as who we contract with through an equity lens. Healing the wounds that separate us is work that requires us to look beyond the City of Raleigh into our broader community. We are partnering with other organizations, area universities, county and regional groups that are also committed to equity and inclusion efforts. Evan, any final words for today's town hall participants?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the work you have done thus far and for the work you're about to do these next 2 days and beyond. It takes all of us examining our hearts and our minds and making space for difficult conversations to move forward. While there is much work that lies ahead, I feel confident that we are making progress toward becoming the type of organization and community that we want to be.
While we may not be able to fully erase the ills of the past, we can all work together to create a better future for all. As you participate in conversations and listen to presentations, I challenge you to be intentional. In order to begin the healing process, we all need to be willing to listen and acknowledge the past in a way that is meaningful so that we can increase awareness and move ahead. Create opportunities to have courageous conversations. You have more influence than you think you do. Take what you learn and encourage others to engage too. We are all part of the solution for reaching my vision, a Raleigh for all.
All right, everyone. That was the welcome from our city manager, Dr. Marshall Adams David, and our assistant city manager, Evan Riley. And so next, it's my esteemed pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Aaron Moore. In August of 2021, Dr. Moore joined the Center for Racial and Social Justice as the new executive director. Dr. Moore has a wealth of higher education experience, including roles as assistant professor of history at Central State University and as adjunct professor of history at Spelman College. She most recently worked as a consultant for diversity, equity, and inclusion, training and creating African American studies curricula for K-12 schools. Dr. Moore earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in economics at Spelman College, her master's degree in African American studies from The Ohio State University, and her doctorate in African American studies from Temple University. Dr. Moore's research interests include classical African civilizations, African social, spiritual, and ethical structures, African American leadership, and post-civil rights African American women. She has a long tradition of community and volunteer experience in a variety of organizations and has been a guest speaker regarding issues facing the African American community in a variety of forms, including conferences, international and community events, and live streaming platforms. Dr. Moore is a leader committed to building a society that works for all of us. We are so excited by the level of expertise and passion that she has for educating, being intentional about action-oriented racial equity and social justice, that we will just turn it over to her so she can have all the time that she wants to impart her wisdom and experience. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Dr. Moore can jump in and share. Welcome, Dr. Moore, and you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Michael. I'm going to share my screen, and good morning to everyone who's participating. And let's just make sure everyone can see the racial equity slideshow. Again, thank you. My name is Dr. Erin H. Moore. I am the Executive Director for the Center for Racial and Social Justice. And here at Shaw University, but I wanted everyone to be clear. I do come to this work from an African-American experience background in terms of my scholarship and research. So the perspective that I'm offering today is my own perspective and not that of Shaw University. So this is going to probably be a little difficult for a lot of people in terms of this presentation. But again, I am a historian, and I think it's really important that we unpack, a lot of these things and where these things come from. So again, we're dealing with race and intention, healing the wound that will not heal itself, and unpacking the binary division in the history of race. And this is something that I think a lot of people have been asking, speaking of the binary division, why are things such black? Why is it black versus white? Why are we not looking at other races? And that's something that I'm going to talk about a little bit further, but I just want you to think about that in terms of as we do this presentation. So we're going to be getting into race as we know it. So as we go through this presentation, I want you all to think about 4 words as I present. And write them down and take notes, of course, and be more than happy. I'll be more than happy to address any questions you may have. But the words that I want you all to think about are belonging, humanity, worthy, and comfort. I think these are 4 key words when we're talking about issues of race and racism and discrimination, and particularly here in the United States. All of these words kind of are under the surface in terms of how we're going to unpack these issues. Okay. So let's begin. So in the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election, the former president of the United States claimed massive amounts of voter fraud to explain his loss. And it should have elicited a lot of questions, and I didn't really hear the media asking certain questions. And so for me, I was asking, well, why all of a sudden is voter fraud a problem? We haven't had massive amounts of voter fraud before. And another question I had is that voter fraud was only located in certain areas, certain locations of the country, certain urban areas. And then again, there's the question of why is he using the word fraud? Voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud. And people just nodding around. Yes, 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 you're absolutely right. It's all this fraud. So the votes are fraud. But he's also saying that the people themselves are fraudulent. Using that term, making it a claim of illegitimacy. That certain people who were voting were illegitimate. And ultimately, what he was saying was that you don't belong here. It was this whole idea of voter fraud was a statement that you don't belong here. You don't have the right to vote. So it's really a question of who belongs. And this is kind of where we are in this country right now. Who is worthy of all the rights and privileges of being American? And what really does that mean? Why is it that some people are now all of a sudden considered fraudulent? Well, we all know what he was really saying. And what he was saying was that it's part of a long history of the iteration of tried and true tropes of racism and labeling Black people as the other. that we're not American, and in some instances that we're not even really human. So these things they're not really said, they're kind of understood. It's kind of a wink and a nod, but everybody knew what he was saying. And, the Fifth Estate, the press is supposed to be challenging these sorts of things, really did not challenge it. Not in terms of mainstream media, not in terms of pushback. We just kind of let that go. So this whole concept of illegitimacy or worthy or voter fraud really gets to the heart of the power of ideas. So these racist ideas and negative stereotypes don't emerge in a vacuum. And if we're ever really going to get to the point where we can really begin to dismantle racism and discrimination in this country and do the work of racial healing, we really have to figure out where these ideas come from. We don't understand the power of ideas and in terms of what they can do. Ideas have the power to shape our identity. They have the power to understand what we mean by culture. They have the ability to frame what we understand about race relations, and ultimately, how we frame public policy. Ideas have the power to elevate one group or culture over another, and ultimately, ideas can determine who is worthy. Who's worthy of America? Who's worthy of the fruits and the benefits of America? Who's worthy of investment in their communities? So racism and racist, ideas kind of permeate the undersurface of all of that. So in order for us to kind of really understand the source of racism, a lot of people say that it could be difficult to pinpoint. Some people reference the ancient Greeks or even the European era of exploration. But for our purposes, we're going to kind of go to where some of these ideas can be codified, where they become part of the lexicon, where they become part of the mainstream. And where these ideas are permanent and justified is in the academy, in the university. Universities define reality, and this is why getting graduate degrees is so important. And in order for us to really understand the roots of some of these ideas about Black people and African people, we really have to go to Hegel, George Wilhelm Hegel. There are many scholars who contribute to the negative ideas about African people, but one of the main architects is German philosopher George Wilhelm Hegel. Hegel is considered by many scholars to be second only to Plato in terms of his influence on Western thought. Hegel has come up with major ideas such as what is freedom and reason, the ideas of progress in a civilized society. He's known for his dialectical thinking of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. His work has influenced such major European thinkers as Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Marx, Engels, and Sartre. But for our purposes, what Hegel has done is contributed to what we know as historiography. And historiography is basically the science of history. It determines what is studied and what is not. Who's important, who is not. Whose stories have value and whose do not. And when we look at these things, we can understand history and what has happened in the course of human events. And so when it comes to African people and what Hegel has to say about that, he basically writes Africa off. He basically says that there's really nothing really that we can say about Africa. So Hegel has 6 points to deny Africa's place in the world. And these ideas are so prevalent and prominent that they still exist today. Now, this is a very long lecture. I have kind of eliminated it and kind of condensed it. I have a whole 20-minute lecture in which I go through and refute Hegel's points, but I just want to kind of give you an idea of what we think about in terms of Africa. And we don't even really know where these ideas have come from. So his first idea has 3 discrete parts. The first part is that European Africa is Africa north of the Sahara. The second part is that there is Asiatic Africa, which is the Nile Valley. And his third point is that there's Black Africa, Africa proper, which is true Africa, Africa south of the Sahara. Now, I put those in quotation marks because just because he says it, it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. So Hegel's second point is that Black Africa is to be portrayed as the land of childhood. It is isolated from the rest of the world, and it forms no historical part of the world. The African is to be viewed as completely savage, immoral, and underdeveloped. Not just savage, ladies and gentlemen, but completely savage. It is understood that Africans have no concept of an immortal soul. And it is assumed that the only relationship between Africa and Europe is one that is based on slavery. And the last point is that Egypt is seen as not belonging to the African spirit or Black Africa. It is merely a passage from the Asiatic or European phase of human development. So you see from this map that we have Egypt kind of tied to Europe, and in some other maps you may see it tied to the Middle East, but it's kind of divorced from Africa. And there's a lot of people today who really don't even think of Egypt as part of the African continent. And for those that know that it's part of the African continent, they're like, oh, well, that's just happenstance. So again, I can go into a long, detailed process about why Hegel's wrong on all of these points, but I just kind of want to talk about just one of them. And that is the whole idea that Africans had no concept of an immortal soul. It's very interesting that they would think that when African people are the first human beings to walk this planet, they're the first human beings to question our existence, to question the divine, the stars, the cosmos, and our inner relationship between them. We already know that the Egyptians' cosmology and phenomenology and so much of their culture is based on understanding spirituality or understanding the cosmos and humans' relationship with it. But if you look at even other traditional African systems, all of them deal fundamentally with the soul. They question, what is it? How do we commune with it? How do we understand with it? How do we understand the soul's relationship to the divine? There's a belief in almost all African cultures that each person has their own seat of the soul. And you can look at the Yoruba culture, for example, it's called the Ori. So this whole idea that Africans have no concept of the soul is extremely problematic. But again, Hegel and other European scholars are looking at Africa from their own Judeo-Christian background and not really taking the time to really explore African culture and understand it on its own merits. So this is the work that African-American scholars are doing now. But the work or the ideas of Hegel are so pervasive that when you really want to present, well, look at what African people have done, look at our culture, the people will say, well, that you're just making that up. That's just not true. Or you're doing this so that you can feel good about yourselves, because we still have this pervasive belief of who African people are. So then Hegel is just one piece of the puzzle, but then the second piece of the puzzle are stereotypes. And again, I have a very long, detailed presentation on stereotypes and their impact, and I've had to condense this just for the sake of this presentation. But let's just be clear on what stereotypes are and the power that they have. Stereotypes are a conventional, formulaic, or an oversimplified conception, opinion, or image. They're basically an oversimplified generalization. But stereotypes work because they serve a function in society, or else they wouldn't last. And the function that they serve is to belittle and denigrate African people from across the diaspora. To maintain stereotypes is to eliminate a people's belief in themselves and to see themselves as less than worthy. Perhaps more importantly, they serve as a gateway for dominance and control, allowing one class of people to assert their dominance over the other. Another devastating impact of stereotypes is that they're not static. They are constantly evolving to suit the present moment. So for example, when we were trying to justify slavery, we have the stereotype of African Americans as the happy darky, that we're so content to be enslaved. But when we begin to assert our rights and our citizenship, we're displayed as if coons, as if we're, unintelligent and can't handle power, or that we're the brute. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. So the first stereotype of African people are Blacks as savages. So the idea of Africans as savages occurs at the same time that Europeans are exploring the African continent. They find a continent with an abundance of nature, and that it's wild and untamed. It's not developed. So consequently, they also see the people that live there as wild and untamed and underdeveloped. And as savages, Africans were viewed as just one step above animals. They were primitive and uncultured. And if you can read the statement from here, the orangutan is carrying off the Negro girl. The 18th century fable of intercourse between apes and African women is represented as fact. Beings between apes and humans appear in the background as if they're the offspring of such a relationship and suggest a missing link on the scale of human creatures. This was in 1795, and this comes from Britain. The next stereotype that we have of African people are African people as animals. So at the same time that Europeans are exploring Africa, they're encountering exotic animals that they've never seen before. Elephants and giraffes and rhinoceroses, and they're also seeing different types of apes, orangutans and chimpanzees. So there's thinking that, oh, there's obviously got to be some relationship between these people. So between human beings and animals, African people must be this missing link. So from this passage, we see on the left side of the figure, there is a young chimpanzee, and on the right, there is a young orangutan. This is a wonderfully interesting comparison. And they make no statement about the human being in the middle, but it's basically just saying there is fact that all of these creatures are related somehow. And so the next stereotype that we have, this is a view by missionaries. We like to think of missionaries as doing good work. They're going out into the world and supposedly elevating people. But, as human beings, they still have their own stereotypes, and in any instances reinforce those stereotypes. So this is an image from a missionary calendar that's sent throughout Europe, throughout the world. And the young boy is saying, holding up a tin shoe of polish. Now you know why I am so black. This comes from the Belgian Congo, and it was from 1938. So what we begin to see is the dehumanization of Black children. Once you begin to, in order for us to really eliminate the humanity, we don't see the children as cute and adorable. We have to, dehumanize these people from the very beginning. And so in our next slide, what we begin to see about Black people and Black children in general is that Black children are dirty. And these are ads for soap that occurred in the 1930s and 1910s in the Netherlands. And the first one is a little postcard at the top of a white boy trying to wash the little Black boy. And it says, someone from whom all is in vain. Like, we can wash and wash and wash, but you will always be dirty. And then we have Doublemint soap, which is, if only you had used Doublemint soap, buttermilk soap, you too could be white and pure and beautiful like me. And this kind of is the launching pad of so much that we have in terms of skin color and colorism within the African-American community, in terms of how we see images of beauty. These are ideas that Black women are still grappling with today, but these things have a long and sordid history. Again, this is very much an abbreviated presentation. So then we can deal with ideas of adults, and we have the mammy and the brute. And so with the mammy, we have a heavyweight, unsexualized Black woman who's no threat to the mistress of the enslaved household. She's not attractive, nobody wants her. And her whole purpose is to serve the white community, white family. We never really think about her own children and her own family, but her whole intention is to serve. And then we have the image of the Black brute. This comes out in World War I, when they're trying to, World War I and World War II, when they're trying to convince European people to not be friendly and nice to the Black soldiers in the war. So with the brute, we have this whole idea that the Black man's whole intention and purpose is to attack and rape and subjugate white women. And that idea is so prominent that it's very much a trope that we see in King Kong, where he's in love with the beautiful blonde woman, the actress Fay Wray in this instance. And then we have the Vogue cover, which I believe was a 2003 or 2004 with LeBron James and Gisele Bundchen. Looks exactly like that previous picture. And Vogue got a lot of pushback from this. LeBron James was the first African-American male on the cover of Vogue magazine. And we all know that they take thousands of pictures in a photo shoot. This was taken by famed photographer Annie Leibovitz. And yet, despite all of the pictures that they took during the photo shoot, Vogue decided to put this on the cover, reinforcing the stereotype of an angry Black man who was attacking or grabbing a beautiful blonde woman. And this kind of subtly reinforces the whole idea even of the Black criminal, that Black people and Black men in particular are something to be worried about. We always have to be cautious when we're dealing with Black men. So these ideas kind of reinforce the whole idea that Black is almost always bad. So whenever Black is used, it's pretty much almost negative. So we have Black male when you're going to manipulate someone to get something that you want. We have Black magic, which is a negative pejorative in terms of when we look at African spirituality, that it's just somehow dangerous as opposed to being a really life-affirming spiritual system. The Black holes of the universe suck all light and life. To be blackballed is to have someone say negative things against you, and you can't move forward because you have this negative stain on your name. In the movies, whenever there's the good guys and the bad guys, the villain always has the Black head. We have the Black Death and the Black Plague, and we even have a devil's food cake versus angel food cake. And then there's so much that we can go into in terms of Christian iconography between the devil and the angels, and we just really don't have time for that. But what I'm showing all this to show you, to say that these notions of Blackness have become embedded in our subconscious. Everyone's subconscious, Black, white, Asian, Native American, Latino. We don't want to think of ourselves as racist, but because these ideas are so prominent and so prevalent, we can't even really separate ourselves from how we think about Black people. So that sometimes when we encounter them, we have this visceral reaction. We don't really know where it comes from because of these ideas and how imagery, the visual imagery serves to imprint our minds in terms of this is who Black people are. So it's a lot of work to unpack that negative work that's, those negative images that have been going on for like 200 years. The scholarships that's been said about African and Black people, that's been around for 200 years at the minimum. We're not even gonna go back to the ancient Greece, at least for this conversation. But it's just a lot to think about. And so when white people say I'm not racist, in their heart of hearts, they really do believe that they're not racist. And I believe that a lot of people that say that really believe that. But the thing is, these things have been imprinted and we don't even know. And Black people themselves, we believe this about ourselves as well. So we have a lot of unpacking that we have to do in terms of how we think about ourselves. Oh, those are your cousins, or those people who live in those neighborhoods and those communities are this type of way, because we've kind of internalized what Blackness is, or what we think Blackness is. So all of this leads to the question of African and African American very humanity. So what does it really mean to be human? If these people, if we really on some subconscious level believe that Black people are just a step up from animals. If they're not human, they're certainly not worth anything. They're not worthy of any public policy investment. If we're going to build shelters at our bus stops in the city of Raleigh, should we put them in the Black community? Are Black folks over there worthy of that? No, they could just sit on a bench and get wet. It's like you don't even think about it. It's not even a consideration. Are Black people worthy of healthcare? Can they just die off? Because after slavery, a lot of white folks thought we would die off. So, we're the only industrialized nation that doesn't have healthcare for all people, but we also have a large communities of color. So there's pushback on that. Are Black people really worthy of education? Well, Ronald Reagan changed the funding formula and said, we're going to do it off property taxes instead of federal money. We're not going to use our federal dollars in those communities. Are those people really worthy of the right to vote? Are they really American citizens? Really? So what happens is that there's a racial hierarchy that has been created between Black, white, and other races. So then why is there this binary division between Black and white? You know, Latino people and Asian people are like, well, you know, nobody ever talks about us. And that's because the whole idea of race and racism has been constructed this way since day one, since the very beginning. I don't even want to say that it was intentional. You know, history often is circumstance and happenstance. So the people that settled here were Europeans who happened to be white. They tried to enslave the Native Americans, but Native Americans had a leg up on understanding the land. They could easily move away and escape, and a lot of them died off from diseases. And so they just happened to enslave people from Africa who happened to be Africans, who happened to be Black. And in order to justify that, we have to justify a racial hierarchy. And so it emerges that it's a hierarchy between Black and white, whether it was intentional or not. So when other races say that no one talks about our issues, often what happens is that, you know, this racial hierarchy it's basically a hierarchy where those that are closest to white are considered the model minority. So not necessarily not by color, although color can be a part of that, but also in terms of attitudes and behavior, where if you were to have a racial hierarchy, you would have Europeans, and then you'd have Asian Americans who are considered the model minority. Then you have Latino and Native Americans, and at the very bottom, you have Blacks. So that's kind of really the source of that racial humanity, racial hierarchy. But really, when we think about humanity and our humanity, who are white people or any other racial group to question the humanity of African people, or really the humanity of anyone? And we know that Africa is the birthplace of humanity. We know from DNA and archaeological evidence that all human beings, ladies and gentlemen, are Africans. There's some people saying that we're the most Africans of all, we're the most human of all humans, because, you know, everybody emerges from the continent. So the whole idea of questioning our humanity and our worth really shouldn't even be a question. You know, we belong not only to the United States, but we belong to the world. You know, it's not about ownership, it's about our place and about the value that people understand, that people have for African people, okay? So we very, very much belong to the United States. So this whole idea of belonging really kind of gets to the heart of the 1619 Project. You know, folks are just losing their minds and mad at the 1619 Project, which orients the origin of American history with the arrival of African people to the English colonies, arriving in Jamestown, Hampton, Port Comfort in 1619, okay? The English colonies. And it's really not a radical idea, because when you study history, history is all about the different perspectives. It's not a radical idea. All historians present from a certain point of view and certain perspective. You go to conferences that say, well, this is my idea about what I think, and people debate the conference and go back and forth and say, well, I see your point here, but I think you should include this, and what about that, and what about that? And people, they do this in intellectual circles all the time. So for example, when we look at military history, military historians will say that America's military strength and strategic insight was what the most important factor in developing America. It's our military that's given us our who we are. Economic historians will say, no. It's the rise of capitalism that's the source of America's power. You have to look at this, you have to look at that, you have to look at the Cotton Kingdom and tobacco, and how we created the accounting profession and all the things that we did in terms of investments and all of that. So, and economic historians will say, oh no, economic history is the most important thing when looking at American history. But then Native American historians will say, oh, well, no. You got to look at the Iroquois Confederation and its contributions to our Constitution. Some scholars say that without the Iroquois, we wouldn't have had the United States Constitution, that the Iroquois had more impact on the development of our Constitution than the ancient Greeks. Now, you want to talk about a controversial statement. As much as we say, oh, democracy comes from Greece and it's this historical legacy from Europe, and then to say, no. What the Iroquois Confederation did, and we can show the comparisons, is really much more important. But, people don't talk about those things because, they're kind of relegated to scholarship and universities and academies. And then fourth, we have Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Now, he got a lot of pushback when that book was published because he's centering the American story on the people, not just the movers and the shakers and the politicians, but the everyday people. Helen Keller, workers' rights, Native Americans, women, the disabled. All of these people have had an impact on who we are as a country. And their stories are just as important and should be valued. Okay. And then for those of us who are in African American studies, I mean, the 1619 Project's great, but it's just part of a whole series of work that's been done in understanding the African American contribution to this country, right? So you have Before the Mayflower, History of the Negro in America from 1619 to 1962, Lerone Bennett used to be the editor of Ebony and Jet magazine. And just about everybody, African American, everybody had this book in their library. And he was always publishing articles of Black history consistently throughout Ebony and Jet. And then you had Ivan Van Sertima, The African Presence in Ancient America. They Came Before Columbus, a classic. This is a book that's well known to a lot of Black folks, but a lot of mainstream people don't pay attention to, or a lot of white folks may not have ever heard of it. Ivan Van Sertima's, his whole catalog is looking at African contribution throughout the world, even in Asia. He's got a book, The Africans in Asia, in China, and the trade that happened. So this is work that's been done as part of a continuum. And these are things that maybe mainstream America may not be aware of. But really the impact of the 1619 Project, what was radical and what was really problematic about it was that it was a piece of work that was available to the masses, that it was not in some obscure library or some obscure bookstore, but that it had the weight and the distributive power and the network of the New York Times, so that everyone could read it, that everyone could learn from it, and that everyone could have the potential to have their mind blown. And that's exactly what happened. And so the crime of the 1619 Project was that they took this scholarship and the whole impact of African Americans and made it available to everyone. And that was a historical perspective that had to be shut down. And it's still, the efforts are being made to shut it down. But again, 1619 Project, this is Port Comfort. This is actually Fort Monroe, Hampton University, where I used to live. And it's there, it's been there, this marker's been there. That's the Chesapeake Bay in the background to say this is where they first came. So this is not unusual. It's not anything radical. But again, that was the story of who we are when we got to the English colonies. But we've been with the Spanish colonies since the very beginning. As early as 1513, when the Spanish first arrived, they had African people with them. And the stories and the journals and the documents say how important and critical Africans were to the exploration of their territories, the languages, translations, and negotiations with African Americans. Fort Mose was the first free Black town in the United States, just a few miles north of St. Augustine. It was built in 1738, before the American Revolution. And by 1600, throughout the Spanish colonies, there were over 56,000 Africans, Black people throughout Florida, New Mexico, and their other Spanish territories. So, people want to get mad about the 1619 Project, I guess y'all have to go back to 1513, or even go back to, they came before Columbus with the Olmec heads and how we were in Mexico. And, Abu Bakr II was an African ruler of Songhai that we speculated he wanted to be an explorer, and he kind of left the throne. And we speculated that he actually came to the United States. We don't know if it was him for sure, but we know that the West Africans made it to the Americas before Columbus. So people want to get mad about that. We have, a whole host of history that we can explore even beyond the 1619 Project. So, for example, we have the story of Esteban, who we believe lived around 1500 to 1539. He was an explorer with Juan Garrido and was with Ponce de Leon as early as 1519. So their whole exploration. His story is fascinating. It'd be a great movie. They were captured by the Indians. They talked their way out of it. They made it to the West Coast. I mean, it's just really a fascinating story of an African person who's been here and has made contributions to our society. So why does history matter? And I know from Mr. Atkinson and everyone else as we were doing this work that a lot of the colleagues and your employees are like, why is history so important? Why do we have to be concerned about it? Well, no one has a problem with history when we're talking about anybody else's history. We can watch the History Channel all day long, talk about World War I and World War II and the rise of the Nazis, and we're still trying to figure all that out, and military air power and all the things that we did. We go back and look at the American Revolution and what happened with George Washington and General Grant. I mean, I watch all that stuff. I mean, the documentary on Grant was amazing because we're still learning about ourselves and our history and our country and the world. So you constantly have to study history. And also because history impacts the present day. But again, as I stated before, ideas are powerful. So if you create a system where only one of people's history is taught and only one story is taught, then only that story has value. But if we learn about everyone's history in particular, if we learn about the injustice that's been done, we can change the world as it currently is. And that's really an issue with the powers that be. They don't want that. Take, for example, all the drama around critical race theory. I don't know how many of you all know what critical race theory is. It'd be great to see if y'all could type it in your comments, but the vast majority of American people don't know what critical race theory is, don't really care to know, but it's just a buzzword. And people are upset about it primarily because race is in it. Race is the trigger. So people are like, oh my God, people teach about race and racism and white people are horrible and blah, 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 blah. No, nobody's teaching that. And they're certainly not teaching it to kindergartners and second grades who don't even have an idea really of the United States as a geographical unit, much less understanding the complications of what race and racism are. And the fact that people really believe that is just beyond ludicrous. But nobody has to really deal with the truth. It's just a trigger to try to get people ginned up and to get people all upset. Critical race theory is a legal theory. It's taught in graduate schools. It's not even really taught in undergraduates and graduate schools. There's been work that's been done in the last 30, 40 years. But, and we can go back and look at the people from right-wing media said, oh, this is going to be our new issue that's going to drive up voters and get, folks chinned up and get really, really upset. So it's really an issue, unfortunately, right now to no longer teach African-American history, to teach Latino and Native American and Asian history. Because African-American history can challenge American doctrine of that we're special and that we're unique and that we're amazing. So, for example, we can teach the history, right now we have a certain idea of what manifest destiny is. Oh, manifest destiny is great. It's a story that makes America unique and special in the world. But when you boil it down to it, we have to really deal with the fact that we lied in every treaty and stole the land from Native Americans. We had the Homestead Act where we gave white Americans who wanted to go out there 160 acres of free land. Black people couldn't get their 40 acres and a mule. And so we all know that land is wealth, and economic historians have looked at that work to say, this 160 acres of free land paved way for a white middle class and white wealth in the Midwest and the West. So that work's been done. But people don't really want to deal with the negative aspects of this great story of manifest destiny and the Pilgrims going out west and fighting these horrible Indians and, braving the elements, all those great cowboy movies that we all grew up watching. At least I did. They don't really show them that much anymore, but that's one of the issues. So what's really wrong with the truth? Well, the truth means that we would have to enact policies that would correct certain injustices. And let me just move on to the next slide. So the acknowledgement of truth really makes people uncomfortable. And for people that want to maintain white supremacy, and I don't think everybody who challenges truth wants to maintain white supremacy, but it challenges white supremacist doctrine of what America is. Ideas are powerful in the sense that we've got to erase historical memory, and we have to erase historical fact because they're dangerous. And so truth makes people, when people are uncomfortable, they don't want to deal with their discomfort. And sadly, we live in an era where comfort is more important than justice. Comfort is greater than justice. Because see, when you're uncomfortable, you have to do something about the discomfort, right? So if you're cold, you got to get a sweater, right? If you're thirsty, you get a drink of water. If you're hot, you turn on the AC. You got to do something to get comfortable, right? Because no one wants to sit in discomfort. And so when ideas of race and racism and the truth about America exist, people have to sit in that discomfort, and they really don't know how to sit in that discomfort. So I don't want to sit in that discomfort. I don't have a sweater that I can put in and make it go away. So in order for me to deal with my discomfort, let's just erase this historical truth. Let's just act like it didn't happen. No, we can't have y'all teach this stuff to our kids. No, I don't want to answer my kids' questions that they're going to come home from school and say, well, you know, for people that live in Forsyth County, Georgia, did we get our land and property because we stole it from white people? Did the Klan run Black people off their land? Is that how we got this house and this property? People don't want to have to deal with that question, right? But that's what happens when you start teaching the truth, right? So when you deal with these truths, you have to admit that something is wrong and that you have to solve it. Because once you know the truth, you have a responsibility to the truth, right? You can't act like it doesn't exist. Truth requires action. It requires you to enact on something. It requires you to do something about it, okay? You cannot ignore the truth of the world that's around you. So because truth is uncomfortable, we'd rather deal with lies in this country, right? This is why the big lie holds so much sway. If they can lie about the political truth, then they can lie about our history. If they can lie about things that we all saw with our own eyes, they can certainly attempt to lie about the past and all the people and forces and events which have shaped this country. If, you know, the fact that the congressman would say, oh, you know, January 6th was just a regular tourist visit, and say it with a straight face and then keep on moving like it's nothing, and dare reporters to challenge him on it, you know? Oh, we're just going to break windows. We're just going to do this. We're going to do that. And just, you know, oh, no, it wasn't a big deal. These people are patriots, right? And this is ideas, right? How we define and frame things. You know, the right wants to say these people are patriots, that they are trying to save the country from what? And from whom? Goes back to the very beginning statement. From the people they consider unworthy. From the people they consider illegitimate. From the people that they're so concerned about sharing power with. And I'm always curious in terms of, you know, the source of that fear, why we have that fear. Because when you think about it, and I don't know, and I'm not trying to, at this point in the conversation, just blame and dump things on white Americans, but in some sense, I kind of have to, because 70% of white Americans voted for a liar and someone who wanted to maintain and enforce white supremacy. Not just the sense of taking away things like Social Security, but really making life really miserable for people of color. I think that's kind of the next thing that's coming down the pipe, that there's a inability from some people to deal with Black joy or Black existence. You have Black people who are out having a picnic in the park, and the white ladies walking by like, how dare those Black people have joy? How dare they exist in this space? So I got to call the police on them, because of course, from the subconscious, all Black people are criminals, and they don't have the right to exist in this park and have a barbecue with their family, because that's kind of where we are right now. So I kind of have to say these things to white Americans at this point. You know, when I used to do this diversity, equity, inclusion work, I used to be like, oh, this is how it used to be in the past. That's not how it is anymore. And white people would be like, yeah, you know, we're not like that anymore. We've moved on, we've progressed. We're moving to a more perfect union. We're moving toward a better society. And there was a willingness to learn and to grow. But I don't know if I can necessarily say those things these days. So where do we go from here? And I kind of almost didn't really want to put anything here because I think that's really up to everyone on this call and everyone to kind of continue to do this work. But I just wanted to throw a few things out there just for us to kind of think about. And so people have to confront their own fear. And everybody has fear about something. But I think what I really want a lot of white Americans to understand is that the fear that that's kind of been placed in you has kind of been created. You know, you had an African-American president for 8 years, and the material conditions of white Americans really didn't change that much under Barack Obama. And it didn't. Power dynamics really didn't change that much when you had a Black president. So what are you so afraid of? I'm not to say that, I don't want to say that, of course, economic policies don't have impact, because they do. But ever since Bacon's Rebellion, the white power structure has used race as a wedge for when people of color could come together to really work for our economic interests collectively against the people that are making our lives miserable. They always use race as that wedge. And people are kind of going for it. And to be honest with you, I, as an African American, I don't have any power over economic policy. I don't own Google and Apple, and I didn't make the trade treaty. So the lives of middle class and lower class white Americans are not what they used to be. And they do have a lot of things to be concerned about in terms of their future and where they're going, as we all do. But the source of your discomfort and your economic, the challenges that you face economically, we're not the source of. But if you continue to listen to the right-wing media, then we're just basically the problem. And we have to be dealt with. But we're not the ones that are causing the problems. So the fear that you have of a multiracial, multiracial, people of color, democratic country is really misplaced. You know, every time life gets better for people of color, it gets better for everyone. Laws that are passed that benefit workers or people of color benefit everyone. You know, this American way of life that we talk about, it didn't come. It wasn't because, you know, the powers that be of the elite said, oh, let's just, you know, give everybody a 40-hour work week. Yeah, let's just have Social Security. The things that we take for granted in this country, this American way of life that we all want to maintain, came from struggle, came from people working and risking their lives and dying for the cause so that we can have this country that we have. But we have to acknowledge that truth, okay? Number two, people have to acknowledge that which they do not know. And I've always said one of the issues that we have with the race and racism in this country is that people don't know who Black Americans are. You know, they just want to believe that Black people are criminals. I remember I went to Villanova when I was in graduate school, and they were doing I don't know if it was maybe during Black History Month session, and the white college kids were like, well, you know, if we go to downtown Philadelphia, the Black people are just going to attack us and rob us. And I was like, first of all, I busted out laughing because I was like, oh my God, you can't be serious. And then I looked at these kids with their eyes I was like, oh, you guys really believe that? And they believe that because they don't know anything about Black people. They just believe what they see in the media and what they've been told. You know, when we look at the history of just the contributions of work that we've done, look at social work. W.E.B. Du Bois basically created social work as a discipline, or field work as a discipline. You know, the work that he did, you know, for 100 years. We can look at Black inventors. You know, white folks love to play golf. Well, you know, the guy who invented your little golf tee was an African-American, the stoplight, African-American. So I mean, there's so many different things that we've done. We're not just sitting around lazily collecting welfare, you know, government money. That's the dominant stereotype of who we are. And you got to be open and willing to learn. You know, to say that you don't know something is not a mark of ignorance. It's just that, you know, you haven't been taught. And if we're going to move forward, you've got to be open and willing to learn. Not to say that people are going to lay blame, but to say this is what happened and this is how we got to this present moment, okay? Number four, people have to decide what kind of vision of America they want to maintain. So we're at a crucial point in our country in terms of democracy. all those characteristics which make America unique, all the things that we fought for in World War I and World War II, all of these things when, people wave the flag and they talk about being patriots in America, we're so much better than Europe. We're so much better than any other country in the world. Well, there's a certain value and a certain philosophy and a certain ideology of what America is, right? And a lot of it comes from some of our founding documents, but it also comes from the work that we've done to create this present moment of where we are in 2022. And the fact that there's a significant proportion of people who are just like, I'm not really interested in that at all. I want dictatorship. I want fascism. I want autocracy. I want white supremacy and white power at all costs. America be damned. And, I wonder if they install a particular person to be dictator for life, what are they going to do with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence? What are they going to do with those documents? What is America going to mean after that, right? We will no longer be this quote unquote city on a hill. We'll no longer be this beacon of freedom and light. We will be a failed empire. I didn't think America would fail so quickly. I didn't think we'd go the way of Greece and Rome so quickly. But if that's what people want, that's something that we're going to have to decide. And if people want that version, I think that all people of color need to get their passports together and work on your plan B. Because I don't think it's fair that we roll back our rights and our lives and everything that we've worked for just because some people are insecure and afraid of this boogeyman that's out to get them. And number 5, people should explore certain policy options of what can be done to improve everyone's life. So again, a study of history shows that look at what all those workers that worked for Rockefeller and Carnegie, what they went through. I mean, everybody suffered. And I used to tell my Black students that, suffering is not just, the struggle's not just been Black folks. White folks have suffered too. When we look at those white folks that worked in the railroad and the steel industries very early on, and the suffering that they did and what they had to go through. And they fought and struggled to get fair wages and a fair working out. Those are things our white folks did that benefited all of us, right? So public policy can impact all of us and make life better. It's voting rights impact everyone and make everyone's lives better. Are we going to really go back to a point where just white male property owners have the right to vote? Is that where we're going in America? So it's very interesting that, the city of Raleigh, in terms of this racial healing and racial equity work, is being done, but we really have to have these long, hard conversations about what kind of country that we want. Black Americans are not the enemy. Asian Americans, Latino Americans, the people coming across the border are not the enemy. It's very interesting. We think about the Great Resignation right now and the demand for workers. There's so many industries, white collar industries, blue collar industries, who are looking for people, and they can't find people. Number one, we've had 800,000 deaths that people really need to think about in terms of COVID. But number 2, we had immigrants that came and did a lot of the work that needs to be done. But now we've demonized all immigrants. And now the immigrants are like, I think I'm gonna go to Canada. No, I'm heading out, I'm going somewhere else. And you have immigrants from other parts of the world who don't even want to come to the United States. So we talk about a labor shortage. Are we gonna have a different policy and a more welcoming attitude towards people of color and people who are immigrants? We cannot constantly be afraid that, if we have a multiracial democracy, that means there's no more room for white people, that white people are just going to be pushed to the side, that they have no more power. No one's suggesting that at all. And the sad part is that when people are doing this equity work, for those who've always had power, when we talk about equity and inclusion, those who've been in power always feel like they're losing something. And sadly, where we are is that race and racism and dealing with these issues are presented as a zero-sum game. That only one group benefits, the other doesn't benefit. And that's not true. Historically, that's not true for where we are. So I've said quite a bit. As a former history professor, I can talk quite a bit. So I'm sorry if I took quite a bit of long time, but I thank you all for your time and your attention. And I'm not sure if we're going to do questions now, if we're going to go to the next presenter, but thank you very much. And I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't begin to tell you how appreciative I am of you. We have Megan here, but we're going to go straight into Q&A, and then we're going to take a little 5-minute break after the Q&A part so that we can regroup and refresh. But Megan Anderson is part of the core team here with the City of Raleigh, and she is the sustainability manager here with the City of Raleigh as well. And she's going to help lead the Q&A session. I know we have some questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to turn it over to Megan, and you can take it away.
Thank you. Thanks again, Dr. Moore, for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as Michael mentioned, Megan Anderson, I head up sustainability for the city and really feel lucky to be a part of the core team working on this work in the city as well. And so just to start out, Dr. Moore, you talked about so many different things today. And, you know, with our theme today, it's all about healing. And it's been a very interesting, I think, past few years for everybody. And as you were sharing, obviously, it's been interesting throughout history. So it'll be really nice today to talk a little bit about where we've come from, what we can learn from that as we move forward. So my questions are kind of around that as well. I just wanted to start out and say, you know, you have such a diverse background in this important work to impact equity in the community. We have folks listening in from various backgrounds and various stages of their understanding of equity work. And it's kind of a journey for all of us, right? And as folks are getting started or are moving through their journey with equity wherever they are, can you share any words of wisdom or helpful tips on what you found to be most helpful to you on your journey?
Well, I thought you were going to ask me for a book list, and I had deer in headlights because I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many books to read. What I will say is that a couple of things I can say. I want people, because you're right, everybody's at their own place of understanding. And I think one of the things I really, in the work that I've done before, in terms of this racial equity work, I don't ever want white people to feel guilty about, oh my God, all the things that happened in the past, or even guilty about the present, because people are born, you live your lives, you're going about your day, and then all of a sudden people are saying, well, wait a minute, look at all the stuff that's happened. And you're like, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. So I think one, in terms of, for where white Americans are, it's not really a feeling of guilt that I want people to take away. And whenever I've done this, I try to be kind of objective. I think what has happened is that people tend to personalize these issues and say, oh, they're saying something about me as a person. And I don't want people to think of you as a person or how you were raised or your family. I mean, there's some people who say, oh yeah, my mother was crazy. She said all kind of foolishness. But as a whole, I don't think most Americans were raised that way. I think of white people that I know, and they're just kind of like, well, I never knew these things. And I think, one, remove this whole idea of guilt. I don't personalize it, and kind of look at race and racism somewhat objectively. Black people may not be able to have that same perspective because we're impacted by race and racism every day. But I think as long as people feel like they have a chip on their shoulder, there's lack of willingness to do the work, right? So step back and say, this isn't about me personally. This is about what we all can do collectively to make this country better. No one's attacking you as an individual, but this is how the structure and the system has been put into place. And one of the things that I think it's important that I really kind of wish white Americans would understand is that policies that negatively impact people of color also negatively impact white people as well. And so kind of recognizing, well, hey, if white people don't get healthcare, I don't get healthcare either. Or if I'm continuing to vote for people who don't want to support government funding, and I'm a teacher in West Virginia, I'm going to wake up 10 years from now and you're not going to have a raise and no kind of salary. And this is what happened with the strike. You're like, wait a minute, I'm a teacher in West Virginia and I don't have a salary and I'm going to have to go on strike. Well, you know what? You voted for people who said they weren't going to support government funding, and now you're seeing the fruits of that. So I think there's work. I think we have to kind of remove the personal piece of it in terms of doing that work. I think really just thinking about as employees of the city of Raleigh, what are you doing that's going to be fair, right? What are we doing that's going to make sense and that's going to benefit our citizens across the board? Because in reality, doing the right thing is really not that hard. There may be some economic and policy implications that we have to think about in terms of, well, if we do this in this community and this, so there's always political and economic considerations to think about, but think about the work that you're doing in terms of being fair and just in terms of all residents. And also I would just think of I'm trying to think of some books that would be a good starting point. I think history is better than perhaps some of the racial equity work out now, because I think people have to understand the context. I love A People's History of the United States because I think it's just a broad story of all of us and all of the contributions that have been made. So I think you kind of got to start with some sort of grounding in our history, in our story. I personally also like the 1619 Project because it gives you, it's not just about when we ride to 1619, it talks about music and art. And, you know, as you see from behind me, I have tons of books that in my work in African American Studies professor that we kind of deal with. But I do think, don't take it personal. And I think for Black Americans and other people of color, really being honest about your feelings and your experiences and your willingness to share. You know, we've done DEI work where I've been in sessions where we've asked open questions and we get nothing but crickets because everybody's afraid to say something or afraid to be labeled as something. And I think for Black Americans, you got to give white people the space to say what they need to say and to make mistakes because they don't know what they don't know, right? There have been times when, you know, I was in a session where an elderly Jewish woman said, well, I said such and such, and I didn't mean anything by it. And people just got all upset because she didn't know that what she was saying was offensive, right? So we kind of have to really be fair in these kind of sessions where we say, okay, what is it that you think and what that you feel? And kind of maybe kind of help people along the journey. I know that a lot of Black people are like, I don't really feel it's my job to kind of help people along on the journey. But if we don't really do that collective work, then we're not really going to get anywhere. So.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we talked quite a bit about some of the things you were talking about around using history to learn about how we move forward and how, you know, if we move these different systems forward and make change happen, that helps and benefits everybody. But we need to look at those that are not having the outcomes that we want to move forward the system. So we're bringing everybody together. Thank you for that. I wanted to move on to a question here in the chat. You had talked about voter fraud, and there was a question around, didn't a large portion of people actually believe there was voter fraud and were not aware of the implications of these claims? So really maybe thinking there was voter fraud and then not being aware of the implications of these claims.
Right. Well, this is why leadership is so important and ideas are important, because once you say it, and once the president of the United States says something, that people are like, oh, well, you know, the president said it, so it must be true, right? When George Bush said that Iraq, Iran, and North Korea were the axis of evil, nobody challenged it. They're like, well, the president said they were the axis of evil, so they must be evil. And so that's the power of the presidential pulpit. That he said there's massive voter fraud. You're like, okay, well, we'll take that under consideration. And if you really believe this to be true, let's investigate that, right? And so people investigated it across states, across municipalities. We've seen outside people come in, some legitimate, some illegitimate, come in and try to recount votes. And they have found that there's no widespread voter fraud. The way the systems are set up and designed, it's really difficult. I mean, you go into the vote to your precinct and you say, my name is Aaron Moore. They're like, well, there's no Aaron Moore in this precinct, so you can't vote here. So there's all these mechanisms and checks and balances in place that have worked, you know, wonderfully for the last 100 years. I mean, technology has changed and added some things to it, but all of a sudden, because he lost and his ego couldn't deal with the fact that he lost because he's always a winner, he's like, well, there's got to be some excuse for the fact that I lost. And so excuse is that there's voter fraud. And so people were kind of like, yeah, not really. But people, you know, people who are in the political spectrum who can use ideas to kind of further their interests have kind of jumped on this idea of voter fraud and say, hey, now we can enact all these bills against voter rights and we're going to use this idea of voter fraud. And then the press has kind of pushed back and said, well, you know, Mitch McConnell or whoever, you know, there's no systematic widespread voter fraud. So why are you enacting all these policies? Well, we just need to do it. We just have to do it. We have to do these things to protect the sanctity of the vote. ironically, there have been a few instances of people voting twice, and they tended to be of the former president's political party. In Pennsylvania, a man voted 2 or 3 times, another man voted his dead wife. So they're like, in the history of this country, I think this last election, I want to say from my reading, I could be wrong, maybe 20 instances of people voting incorrectly in the 71, 73 million people that cast votes. So there's no widespread voter fraud, but it's an idea who's taking a life of its own that people can use for political purposes. Just like people say, oh, we're going to use critical race theory and use it. And the American average public's not going to really dissect that or really question it. If you have trust and faith in your leadership, which is what most of us were brought up to believe, right? You trust your president, you trust your leaders. And so for people that trust the former president, they believe that. And when you say, oh, well, there's no evidence of that, they're like, well, yes, it is. They're just hiding it, and this, that, and the other, or the machines did this. And so, we've lived through the last year of just all kind of foolishness because somebody put that idea out into the ether and everybody's kind of running with it. And that's why ideas are so powerful. So yeah, even though they said it, it's not just that there's voter fraud, but it's specific people who are committing voter fraud. So those are the people that we have to kind of rein in. So yeah, and I, people, I think there was a guy that said, I'll give you $1 million if you find examples of voter fraud, or 100,000, and he ended up having to pay somebody who was of the former president's political party because he found evidence that that person committed voter fraud. So, people from Missouri, I'm the show me state. Show me where it is. Where's the evidence? And evidence used to matter, but evidence doesn't matter. So.
Thank you. And so I think we have time for one more question. I wanted to get to this one here. As you do this work and continue to learn about why we're in the state that we were in, how do you remain objective and not have a sense of anger? What motivates you to continue to educate?
Well, pretty much up until last year, I'm able to do this work because I always felt as a society, as a country, we were always progressing. I always felt that we were moving forward. I knew from my own experiences what I didn't know and just how shocked I was. And I've always had audience of mixed race people who have always been welcoming and receptive to just learning about history. It's not about blame again. It's about, and in my perspective, in terms of doing DEI work, it's historical. I know there's some people who want to deal with the political and economic implications right now, but for me, when you present something historically, it's something that happened in the past, and this is what happened, and this is kind of where we are now, people can say, look at it somewhat detached and objectively, because I feel that the most important thing to do in terms of doing this work is remove your personal feelings from it. So when you can do that historically, and I always felt that as a society and as a country, we're moving forward, and you always have some stragglers, but and this is the whole dynamic of elections and political parties, right? Sometimes the liberals are in charge, sometimes the conservatives are in charge. We've had differences of philosophy in terms of where our country goes, in terms of, do we want to have, world trade, free trade, or, it's just all these different policies. But as a country, we're moving incrementally toward a better place. And as a world and society, we're moving incrementally toward a better place. Now, I'm a little more concerned about that, because I don't know what the vast majority of American citizens want. I don't know, I'm not seeing this belief that we can move forward, that we consistently can move forward in a particular progressive, open society. And I think our elections in 2022 and 2024 are going to be real key points. The thing is, when people do surveys, we find that the majority of Americans feel want an inclusive, fair society, but they're not willing to step outside of their comfort zone or what they're taught to make that change. They're not willing to step outside of party orthodoxy or doctrine to say, look, this is where we need to go. We don't have politicians who are brave right now, and we don't have American citizens who are brave right now. So even though when people do a quiet survey in their own home and say, this is the kind of world I want, they're not really willing to step up. We really need Americans to really be brave we're letting a small minority of people dictate who's running our election boards, who can certify elections, who can dictate policy in terms of who votes. You know, if we're going to get to a point where only one political party can certify an election, and we're not going to have a bipartisan election boards to certify how we vote, then that's going to be a major problem. And so for me, historically, I think I see the long-term effects. I'm like, I work at a historically Black college and university. What if people get empowered? They say, you know what, we're no longer going to have federal funding for HBCUs. Those are the things I think about, that if people who really want to do damage to a certain community could do, because they don't believe that federal funding should go for these sorts of things. And that's kind of where we are in a society, and those are the kind of things that we have to think about. So in terms of remaining optimistic, I believe in our people, I believe in power, and I believe in voting. And I believe once more people are aware, they will make decisions which benefit all of us. But there's also an information vacuum, there's also social media. So we've got a lot of different things that are going against us. But I think I believe in the power of humanity in all people and all cultures. And I've never had a situation where I've had students who come in my classes and people who've done workshops who had a negative perspective. And then after doing the work, they're like, okay, I see what you mean. So I think people have to kind of let go of what they believe in terms of the stereotypical view they believe about people, and just say, you know, I'm willing to work from you and learn from you, because if your life's better, my life's better. And I think we have to really, really think about that, you know. So I think, and I'm really impressed with what the city of Raleigh is doing in terms of making a commitment to do this work, because you all realize that the city's got to benefit everyone. And as public servants, you guys are the front lines and the implementers are making that happen. And I think that your willingness to embrace these challenges is commendable. And I think there's so much that can be done that the city is in process of doing. And I think that gives people hope. When you see leadership willing to engage, then I think that's hopeful. Yeah, I'm sorry. And I didn't realize I had a time constraint, and I realized I've been talking for quite a while. So I'm so sorry. I told Michael that I talk quite a bit, but he can say you only have 35 minutes. So my apologies if I've gone too long and if I gone over the other person's time. So thank you.
No, that is totally fine, Dr. Moore, and we appreciate that. We, in the interest of time, we know there are still questions in the Q&A. So what we have done, we have captured those questions, and we're going to send them to you so that you can answer them, because I want everyone's question that may feel like they have a question to be answered. And I see we have some hands raised too. So we really want you to put your question in the Q&A so that Dr. Moore can really provide an answer for your question, and then we will dispatch those questions to you so that you will see that your question was answered. So what we're going to do, we're going to move into a 5-minute break, and then when we come back, we are going to have Mr. Danya Perry. So let's take a quick 5-minute break, and then we can come back. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue to move on in the interest of our time so that we can allow enough time for our next presenter to present. We have with us from Wake County, the Director of Equity and Inclusion, Mr. Danya Perry. And Wake County is firmly committed to becoming an even more diverse, equitable, and inclusive employer. As a result, they hired Danya Perry to lead that effort as the county's first DEI director. Prior to joining Wake County, Mr. Perry held 2 critical leadership positions for the Raleigh Chamber of Commerce. He served as Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity, where he led the Triangle DEI Alliance, and as a Director of Equitable Economic Development. As the county's DEI director, Mr. Perry leads Wake County's efforts to advocate for access, equity, inclusion, and diversity through innovative policies, programs, and services. He is responsible for creating a clear vision and effective strategy for developing a culture of equity, diversity, and inclusion, providing strategic direction for training initiatives on cultural competency, gender differences, disability, sexual harassment, and other topics designed to increase awareness and support of equity and inclusion values, and also leading strategic initiatives that promote belonging and support working environments where all have an opportunity to succeed. Mr. Perry is a North Carolina native who grew up in New Bern. He earned his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and his Master of Arts in Public Administration from North Carolina State University. And we are also so excited to have him to join us here at the Town Hall today, but we are also looking forward to partnering with him in the future. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Danya Perry.
Hey, Michael, thank you so much for that introduction. I really do appreciate that. And you actually forgot to add that NC State was the greatest university on the planet. I think, and specifically, you know, better than that school that's light blue. That's if you get on 40 and you travel west about 35 minutes, there's another school, light blue. A lot of people like it. I don't know why. So. But listen, I truly do appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. Shout out to you and the leadership, Marshall and Evan, and you know, I see you, Lisa, Megan. You know, I love conversations like this because it forces us to be reflective, and it forces for us to evolve. And these conversations, as Dr. Moore so eloquently put it, and her session was amazing. It really is about challenging the status quo, and really I like how we fire off and really make our it's about neuroplasticity, right? We need to stretch our brain and stretch our biases and stretch the subjectiveness of how we receive information. And so while it may feel uncomfortable, you know, it's a comfort and knowing that this is also a beautiful struggle. So I truly do appreciate this process and this opportunity. I want to really quick before I get started, I want to share my PowerPoint here, but in this conversation, we're going to be focusing in on specifically talking about opportunities to use your platform and to look at privilege and how that can be used as an opportunity, building from what Dr. Moore spoke about, is understanding the history, understanding the backdrop, but thinking about what can I do now, you know, because there's a lot, it's almost like the enormity of the problem or the enormity of the challenges could preclude our efforts or even paralyze us from activity, from moving forward, from evolving. But I like to do is challenge the notion that what we need to do is push through that and start to activate immediately. Now, part of that for me is my own personal evolution and my own personal journey towards truth and towards acknowledging what's going on around us. And so for the last 6 months, I've been ensuring that within my presentations, I've been including an acknowledgement of the land that we sit on, and specifically acknowledging those indigenous people, our Native Americans within our state and their contributions. You know, I like to take a moment to honor the land that is beneath us. The North Carolina land and the territory we live on today is the ancestral homeland of many American Indian tribes and indigenous people. Over the past 14,000 years, this land sustained family life, provided nourishment, provided a haven to practice rich heritage, cultures, ceremonies, and a safe haven. Throughout history, American Indian communities across North Carolina have demonstrated resilience and the resistance in the face of sustained displacement, during the removal in the face of complex, traumatic, and violent efforts to separate indigenous tribal people from their culture and their land. It is important to remember the history of this land in order to break the cycle of colonization and continue erasure of indigenous peoples. We must acknowledge the history of the space and places that we occupy to both understand and unlearn the many ways that we have been socialized. And this is important, and all of this acknowledgement, part of this that I always lean into and center around is unlearning. Unlearning to then learn. And it's a process. So for any of you all, when you are listening to Dr. Moore, when you are part of these conversations, you know, I just want you to resist the urge of disconnecting or wanting to be in a space of debating the evolution of our knowledge, right? So when we go deep into this conversation, for us, one of the things I want to make sure I want to acknowledge, and one of the things that I want to challenge you all with, and I want you all to go on a journey with me, is through this virtual privilege walk. Now, I'm not sure if the chat is open, but how many of you all have ever participated in a privilege walk? I know some of us have. Before COVID, we were in front of each other. You may have done it and been a part of a privilege walk in different capacities. Lately, we've had to move and do it a little bit different. And we've had to do our privilege walks virtually. But either way, it's an opportunity to be able to reflect. It's an opportunity to be able to talk about our opportunity to use our privilege to be able to support our historically underrepresented and marginalized communities. So for those that have never been a part of the walk, today we're going to have an opportunity to do so. All right, you with me? You down? All right, I hear you. So let's get started. What I want you all to do when we think about this privilege walk, and before we get into the conversation about the power in our privilege and our platform, one thing that we have to understand is that privilege is not associated with one particular race, one gender, or individuals with affluence. It's not a reflection on you or how hard you work. It's not about your work ethic. We can all use privilege and access and influence and resources to make systemic changes across our region. And we are giving you an opportunity right now to think about the power and privilege and access and resources that you have to support movements towards reimagining systems that may have perpetuated inequities in relationship to race. That's what we're doing today. So let's get ready. I want you to grab a pen and a paper. What I'm going to do is go through a series of questions. And with each question, I want you to add one if that particular privilege relates to you. So get your pen, get your paper. I'll give you a second. You're going to start with a score of 0. Everybody is even Steven. And you will, as I go through the questions, you will add 1 if that relates to you, if that particular commentary of that privilege relates to you. Sound good? Give you a couple more seconds and we'll jump right in. I'm not sure if Michael told you, but we've actually extended my presentation another 3 hours. So you just sit back, all right? Sit back. This is going to be fun. I assume that comment would have had Michael jump back onto the screen saying, no, we don't have that much time.
You know, I was laughing and I forgot I had myself muted, but we wish.
I just wanted to make sure you were still tuned in, sir. So
I'm here.
But honestly, you know, in all, while I'm joking, you know, Dr. Moore, these conversations, I mean, these are really seed starters. So I encourage you all, if there's any opportunities outside of these type of sessions to, whether it be, you know, virtual or in person, to continue to and to evolve your own understanding and build your own fluency, I would say take it. Please do. All right. You should have your pen and your paper. Let's go ahead and get started. First question that we are offering up to you. Add 1 if you are right-handed. First thing. Add 1 if you are right-handed. Add 1 if you never had your utilities cut for non-payment as a child. Never. Add 1 if you had health insurance and regularly saw your pediatrician as a child. Add 1 if there were more than 50 books in your home growing up. I know me, we had that old world's encyclopedia. That was at least 25 books.
The whole collection.
The whole collection. Add 1 if your primary ethnic identity is American. If your primary ethnic identity is American. Add 1 if you were never called names or were never made to feel uncomfortable from jokes because of your race, class, gender, sexual orientation, or ability. Add 1 if there were people who worked for your family to provide assistance, such as cooks, gardeners, or a nanny. Add 1 if you could show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear or ridicule or violence. Add 1 if you've never been the victim of excessive force when pulled over by the police. Add 1 if you studied the culture of your ancestors in elementary school. Add 1 if you went to school speaking the primary language in which courses were taught. Add another 1 if you were taken to art galleries or plays by your parents. Add 1 if your family never had to move because they could not afford the rent. Add 1 if you feel good about how your identities are portrayed in the media. Add 1 if you ever inherited money or property. All right. Let's ask this question. How do you feel after participating in this walk? What are some of your thoughts? I'm going to see if I can access the chat, and if you all can just put into the chat really quickly a couple words that kind of speak to what you were thinking as you were participating, as you were answering some of the questions, on some of the reflections. Mary, I see you. You say blessed. Thank you for sharing. Ruben, privileged. Catrice, both privileged and sober. Thank you, Pam, for sharing that. Megan, grounded. I see you. Evan, fortunate. I see you. Lisa, reflect to some of the things I take for granted. Oh, yes, I feel that same way. Still thinking through the impact. I see you, Lauren. Oh, Dr. Moore, education and class matter, those intersections. There's so much intersectionality when we talk about privilege and our opportunity to use that privilege and the power that we have for others. Philip, I feel exactly like I have felt for many years. Thank you, Philip. We'd love for you to expound. Stephanie, stopping to think. I love that. And that commentary, what I center around is to stop. Because sometimes listen, we are all driven in our world. We have a lot of competing priorities, but when we get a chance to sit down and to reflect and to think about the opportunities that we've been afforded and the opportunity to take that opportunity to then move it forward to be able to support others. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. for all of this sharing. You know, it's great when I think about when we have these conversations about, and please continue to share within, you know, within the chat. This privilege walk, a good partner of in our community from the diversity movement, Jackie Ferguson wrote an article in the Forbes magazine, focusing in on what she said is privilege is not a dirty word. The narrative of privilege that has been sort of the counter narrative to privilege is that that you did something wrong. You know, the privilege of not working for something, as if you know, we are all sort of in a place where we're trying to demonize folks that have privilege. Whereas what we're hoping to do and what we want to do and what we're empowering people to do is to use and to reflect and to stop and think, using Stephanie's word, that where I stand, if I stand in a position of privilege, if I stand in a place to be able to reimagine, to influence decisions, to support a neighbor, another resident, we can use that opportunity while at the same time unlearning to be able to move things forward. So, you know, there's power for those of us who's right-handed. You know, a desk, like growing up, desk in school buildings, you know, or for right-handed people. You only had a couple people that had to use those left-handed desks. There's a power in height. I think that I read that in a study that there's this bias towards candidates that are tall, and there's a correlation of success for those that are taller, and also people that are taller can reach the top shelf. So there's a privilege there. There's a power in just our geography, where you were born. Dr. Raj Chetty put out a study back in 2016 out of Harvard University that talked about the based off of your zip code, there's a correlation between where you were born and the probability of you going from the bottom 20% to the top 20% of upward mobility. And so where you were born is also important. And there's a power, obviously, of socioeconomic privilege, all of those things. Now, when we center around addressing race equity, when we center around looking at the challenges of our Black and Brown residents within our community, what we're asking for is the power of the privileges of our cohort and our brothers and sisters who are white. Because what we want you to do is to take that privilege of being white and turn that into allyship. Because you can take that privilege and allyship and become co-partners in this work towards race equity and challenging the notions of systems that were not systemically flawed. Because when we talk about the challenges of race equity, we are both looking at not only interpersonal challenges, and that's, you know, the hatred and the vitriol that we see. Sometimes when we think about racism, we think about the Klan. You know, we think about crosses being burned. We think about things that we've seen on those old historical videos during the civil rights movements, during Jim Crow slavery, during the enslaved periods of time in our America's history. But we also know that to become an anti-racist means to be actively engaged and looking at systems that may have created those disparities, looking at those policies and practices and laws that were created that continue to perpetuate inequities. And so we need your privilege and your allyship to move us forward. So please understand, we start here. We recognize that well-intentioned people create inequities every single day. Every single day. Well-intentioned folks that are doing this work. We have so many amazing community leaders within our region. We have people that seek to serve the public just like you every single day. And as well-intentioned as we are, sometimes we are also perpetuating the system that we need to reimagine. And so going back to, Stephanie, I'm going to continue to use your word. We have to stop. We have to think about those opportunities. And so this is an opportunity for us. When we talk about steps towards allyship, I have a really simple way and an approach to how do we look at becoming an ally. And I base it off of what is very simple, the 3 R's. The 3 R's are you'll reach in, reach out, and reach over. All right? Say it to yourself right now in your chair. Reach in, reach out, and reach over. All right. I can hear you. I can feel your vibes. I see you. I hear you, Kathy. I hear you, Tansy. I hear you all saying it. Reach in, reach out, and reach over. I appreciate that. So what are we doing when we reach in? Reach in means conducting a self-assessment. That means looking at our own biases. That's looking at our weaknesses, acknowledging and celebrating our strengths, and doing an inventory of how we were socialized and how we can move forward to be able to support our historically underrepresented residents. I call it JBOPs. You know, when we talk about JBOPs, we're looking at doing a self-assessment of our judgment, our beliefs, our opinions, and our perceptions. That's your JBOP. So you take your JBOP and you have conversations with those around you. Now, if you're like me, you know, I tend to gravitate to people that think just like me, that have same lived experiences like me. It's based upon my community, how my family has operated. And sometimes we can be in our own, echo chamber. You know, you don't get challenged unless you're talking about, you know, ACC football, ACC basketball, or, you know, we're in NFL playoff times. My Bears aren't in the playoffs, but that's okay because Dallas Cowboys lost too. So all's good in the world. I'm sorry, that was just a little shade I had to throw out there. My apologies. But once we get outside of our own echo chambers and we start to put it up against other people's lived experiences, that's an opportunity to be able to create an opportunity to not only to challenge how you were socialized, but then also to look at opportunities to evolve our thinking. Another part of the reaching in process means that we need to seek opportunities to increase our own fluency around equity. You know, looking at opportunities to continue our learning. This conversation today is one of your steps towards increasing your own fluency and your continuous learning, and looking at how do you coach and how do you connect with people that can help you interrupt the biases that you are subconsciously don't know that's going on. You know, that subliminal bias speaks to a lot of what Dr. Moore spoke about when we talk about the imageries of Black Americans and Black Africans. That imagery is important to understand. So when you have commercials that come out and they seem very insensitive, like that Vogue cover with LeBron James, or when you look at the Dove ads, which is a soap commercial, and you probably have seen the backlash that the companies are receiving about that, or Adidas that created a shoe, a basketball shoe with a little toggle of a chain that the kids would put, literally a chain, a bondage chain around their ankles, which was a part of the novelty of the shoe. And we can say that more than likely there wasn't a lot of diversity in the room when these conversations, there wasn't a lot of true understanding when these decisions were being made, or even if there was diversity in the room, maybe those individuals did not feel compelled or included enough to be able to speak up and say, that's insensitive, or we need to understand our biases in relationship to what we're putting out to the world. So we have to be active in our learning. We have to be active in pushing forward. We have to be active in disrupting and interrupting our biases. It's tough, trust me. It's not easy. Equity work is really messy. It truly is messy, but you have to have an intentionality to reach in and to start to really tear through the layers of how we were all socialized. The second part of this 3Rs process is how do we reach out? That's how do we connect to people that are different. So what I want you to do is seek out a variety of diverse voices and listen to understand. Don't be like me when it comes, just like my wife tells me all the time, you know, she said, you don't listen to understand, you listen so that you can get ready to present your your argument, right? You know, your debate. No, sometimes you just have to be quiet and listen to understand. You know, learning and growth will not happen without being challenged. And sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it's tough when you're a part of a conversation like this and you want to do that, but, oh, I know that history, but, oh, I understand that happened, but what about this? That's tough. not to want to give that defense, but I want you to resist that, because this information is, none of us have been the architects of the systems that we are in right now. None of us are. When we talk about the 1619 project, none of us were architects of that system. So the guilt that you may feel, I want to offer you grace. I want to offer you grace as you start to reach out and connect with others, because what we do is we have an opportunity to change those systems now. We have an opportunity to reimagine those systems now, regardless, if you actually benefited from those systems, or for those Black and brown residents that were subjugated to those systems. We offer grace because ultimately we know that we only can go as far as we all together. What I want you also to do when you reach out and you work across differences, to become a champion and an advocate for our underrepresented community. Sometimes when I hear the word activists, and I'm sure just like many of you, when you hear activists and advocates, you sometimes think, oh, those are the folks that are out there protesting. No. Activism and advocacy can come in many different shapes. It can be engaged in so many different ways. You could be an activist within your job when there's a conversation, using Dr. Moore's example about the bus routes, and you're talking about, hey, where should we invest money in terms of this new bus route? And you're the person who's at that table, and you're saying, well, have we had a chance to talk to the communities that are maybe impacted? That's advocacy. That's being an activist. Have we had an opportunity to engage the impacted folks that we are talking about in this particular practice? When we're thinking about this new practice within HR, did we have an opportunity to do a focus group, to talk about it, to learn, to just listen, to understand? All of those are elements of activism. All of those are elements of advocacy. So reaching out is an active engagement of not only your own learning and assessment of yourself, but it's also about connecting with those that have different lived experiences than you. And then lastly, reach over. I love reaching over. Reaching over is probably the toughest thing that you will ever have to do, especially when you talk about connecting with people in your circle. There's not going to be anything easier. Calling out the unacceptable behaviors and inequitable practices takes courage. It takes courage. It takes a level of selflessness to want to stand up amidst, it may not be popular in your group or within your community, to challenge a stereotype, to challenge a label. It's interesting for me personally, one of the hardest places for me when I take this to heart is to go into my barbershop and you hear homophobic jokes. For me to stand up and challenge my barber of 25 years amongst our peer group who had just been laughing about said joke. And I have my son and my nephew to my left side, knowing that if I stood up in that particular moment, the reaction that I would get, but it didn't matter. In that particular moment, what I saw was the impressions of my son and my nephew. That was more important than me being ostracized, me being clowned. But the cool part about when you stand up, you don't realize how many other people were also in that same mindset of wanting to stand up. And by you standing up, you gave them permission. You gave them permission to also stand up. And reaching over is truly it's a practice of being pioneering and being innovative, and also to set trends. I want you all, when you have an opportunity, to go to YouTube and I want you to Google crazy dancing guy. It's a great video. It's a funny video. It's about a young man who, I don't know if he's young, but a guy who's at a concert, outside concert, enjoying life. I mean, he is dancing by himself and he's doing these crazy dances and he's enjoying himself. And then all of a sudden you see two people run up beside him and they start dancing. And then you see two more people coming up and they're dancing with him. And then you have 10 people and then you have 30 people. And within about 2 to 3 minutes of this video, you have literally hundreds of people dancing with this one person. And my hopes is with that practice of that one person, Dan, I love how you put it, that first follower, the practice of that one person, when initially everybody looking at this young man dancing, we were probably saying, what is that crazy guy doing dancing by himself? But over the years, what we're ultimately going to find out, and when we have new people coming into our community, they're going to be asking the question, what are those crazy people doing sitting down? Because look at all of these people dancing. Look at all these people calling out unacceptable behaviors. Look at all these people challenging inequities and fighting for our historically underrepresented, marginalized community. Oh, you're crazy for not doing it. And that's the work that we're doing now. The last part about reaching over speaks to amplifying the voices of others, recognizing the platform and privilege that you have and support building spaces for inclusive voices. Historically, when we talk about our white brothers and sisters and the work that we're doing, please understand over the history, if we start back in 1619 of the first enslaved African in the Americas, when we look at the events that led to and that were a big part of the history of where we are today and the systems that we're trying to reimagine, from when slavery was abolished, to slave codes, to Jim Crow laws, to the Civil Rights Act, to affirmative action, to police brutality, to the lynchings. When you look at this and this grid right here, I don't want you to focus on when it happened in the event. I know that we had a great, Dr. Moore provided us a great context of the history. What I like for you to focus on is that far right column, the percent of time that we spent in this state. So the majority of our time in this state in fighting towards true equity, we've only spent about 15%. That's 1964 to now. We've only spent about, to date, 15% of our time in working towards true race equity. One, that tells us that there's a lot of work to do, but I also want to acknowledge all the individuals, the white men and women that also stood up to get us to that place. We had John Brown, who was an abolitionist back in the mid-'80s. He used his platform and privilege to support the liberation movement of enslaved Africans. You may have heard about the Harper's Ferry Revolt, which is a failed revolt, but historically, again, the man was an advocate and used his space and privilege and gave his life for something that he considered to be right and exact. We could talk about Anne McCarthy Braden. She was also another civil rights activist in the 1900s, used her platform and privilege to disrupt real estate practices within her community. She organized white Southerners in Louisville to support civil rights movement, and it was also a huge voice in education reform and integration. Talk about Joan Mulholland, again, another civil rights activist, one of the freedom riders. She used her platform and privilege to participate in the Woolworth lunch counter sit-in in Greensboro, along with other white counterparts that used their position and privilege to be able to support the work. What do you all see when you all see this cartoon? This is Thanksgiving Charlie Brown, one of my favorite cartoons. What's the first thing that you see, that you think of when you see this? Just put it in the chat. Yeah. It's interesting because when I first saw this cartoon, I didn't see what people are saying in the chat right now. I used to tell my son, I hate being an adult because you see, when you think about cartoons and imageries, and again, Dr. Moore spoke to this, this cartoon is just one representation of the mind of where Charles Schulz was in his particular day and age. And it was represented within cartoons and what he produced. And the fact that you had Franklin, who in this moment, we can say that this table is somewhat diverse. You got Snoopy, who's a different breed. You have gender diversity. And then you have Franklin. That was the first attempt towards race diversity, but he certainly does not look included, even though there is some level of diversity at the table. And I had to ask the question when I was becoming an adult and I started seeing this and started thinking about what did Charles Schulz, what was his story to this place to do this? To use his power and his platform and his privilege to start to advance the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And this was his contribution, because he didn't have to include Franklin, but we have to shout out one of the advocates and the activists and the person who brought this up to Charles Schulz, Harriet Glickman, who was a retired school teacher who basically sent Charles Schulz a letter right after the Civil Rights Movement, right after the Civil Rights Movement, after the Civil Rights Act, and talked about how Charles Schulz within his cartoons, recognizing the popularity of the cartoon, you can use your platform and privilege to start to advance the conversation about race. And if I'm not mistaken, the Charles Schulz actually wrote back to Harriet saying that while he also agreed that he should do something, he did not want to be patronizing to Black and Brown residents by adding just of one figure. And so he did not know how to approach it himself. And through conversations, that started to give him the power and the privilege, or it started giving him the permission to start looking at opportunities to integrate another voice, which was Franklin, even though to my knowledge, I never heard Franklin talk. I'll be honest with you. Never heard his voice, but at least it was an opportunity to advance the conversation for Charles Schulz. And we have to give credit to Harriet Glickman for even bringing that up, using her platform and privilege to even write that letter. So I want you all to feel empowered, and I want you all to feel and to give you all permission to be able to have conversations like this in the space that you lead. With some of the work that we're doing within our community, we launched a conversation around dismantling systemic racism called A Better Way. I want you all to continue the conversation not only within your own sphere of influence, but I'd like for you also to go to our website, abetterway.com. And if you haven't yet, I want you to sign and endorse the work that we're doing. You can actually sign up and you can get an action guide of information, of some of the information that we talked about in this presentation, ways to become an ally, opportunities to be able to build your fluency in this space. And also, if you're part of an organization outside the city of Raleigh, and City of Raleigh is also a huge partner of the A Better Way work. But if you're part of a nonprofit, a church, any other outside organization, I know Girl Scout cookie season is here. So if you're part of the Girl Scouts, have your organization also sign up. We're asking for companies and organizations to submit their logos to show this community collection of the willing to advance this conversation around dismantling systemic racism and reimagining systems. Some of the other resources, again, what we also provided, just like Dr. Moore said, there's so much good information out there to advance the conversation. These are just a few that I would love to offer to you. On that website, you can also go and find, we have a clearinghouse of information, podcasts, videos, TED Talks, great books. If you want a great book to start with, I would encourage you to start with Beverly Daniel Tatum's work, Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum's work, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? She has a great TED Talk. Google Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. She has a great talk, a TED Talk, talking about the conversation she had with her son when her Black son was in a classroom and a child asked him, is Langston Black because he drank chocolate milk? It is a great conversation about how we engage conversations with our young people about race early, because ultimately, if you're like me, we do shy away from it. we do absolutely shy away from it. And when we shy away from it, we give them sort of the sense, our kids, we give them the sense of not, being a part of, the shared conversation, or is that, or is it, or as if they are being shushed to talk about race. And I understand that it's tough talking about race, but the reason why it's tough talking about race is because we don't practice talking about race. And so we need to start young with our young people to talk about race, so they don't feel shushed or ashamed to be able to talk about it. So that being said, I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you all. Michael, I know I went way over my time. I know I have. I felt your energy. I felt it. But I would love to again offer up any opportunities to have a conversation with anybody. Any questions? Megan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Danya. It's great to see you. Really appreciate you being here today and bringing the conversation back from all the history, bringing us some more history, and then talking about things we can do today and grounding us with that great exercise and everything as well. I'll remind everybody to use the question and answer box and put any questions you have in that question and answer box, and we'll get to those with Danya as well. So Danya, to start out, I wanted to ask you the same thing that I asked Dr. Moore to get started. Knowing you have a really diverse background in this work to impact equity in our community, and we've got all these different folks joining us from various backgrounds and stages of their understanding, and as they're getting started or moving through their journey with equity, any words of wisdom or helpful tips on what has been helpful to your journey. And I'll just say, I really, that story during your reaching over about the barbershop, and you really put it in a good perspective for us to understand what that might feel like, hearing an inappropriate joke and having all your peers around you, and with your son and nephew there too, was a great example. But how do you get to that point that you can do those things? And what can you share with us that might help us as we continue this journey?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I was thinking about it earlier. It's sort of like if anybody has ever played double dutch growing up. My sisters used to play, and they used to make me play. They would get telephone wire and they would be swinging. And the hardest part, yeah, I know, Michael, right? That telephone wire is tough when you got hit on your ankles. But the toughest part of double dutch was that feeling of jumping in. It's that rocking back and forth. You're trying to figure out when to jump into the jump ropes, and the goal is not to be hit, but there has to be this level of, right now, I would like to ask people to have this sense and confidence in being fearless in your journey. So your entry point has to be really defined by what you want and your pacing is going to be important in this. So you can say it can start with just getting into books and podcasts. Or it can, for me personally, it was sitting down with elders. I had the advantage of having, my dad was a preacher, Amy Zion preacher. My mother was a Black Panther from New Bern. She went to Howard University and became a Black Panther. And we did a lot of activism work in DC, and then moved back to New Bern and started the Carter G. Woodson Foundation. And so I had the resources of people around me that were always having these conversations. And so I felt lucky and blessed to have a mindset of wanting to challenge the status quo and to ask questions. For those that may not have that, you really have to rely on diversifying your net of connections. You have to build out your circle just a little bit more. I would say, and there's 3 different ways that I would go about it. One, dine with somebody different. Okay, that's the first thing. If you dine with somebody different, you learn a lot about somebody based upon conversations on food, right? Food is connected to our culture. So dine with somebody different. Drink with somebody different, all right? Go out and just have fun, right? If you don't drink, that's okay. But whatever is synonymous to having something for, happy hour, right? Just go have a drink with somebody. Go socialize with somebody. Go do something recreational with somebody different than you. And then lastly, go worship with somebody different. Go worship with somebody different. And whatever that sacred practice of worship, whatever that solace time, it doesn't have to be anything religious. It doesn't have to be specifically spiritual. but whatever that sacred time is for other people, spend time in that space with people, connect people in their different elements. I remember hearing a preacher say that the most segregated hour, during the week is on Sundays. And that is true because our churches are absolutely more so than not truly segregated based on the communities that we live and grow in around. So those are 3 opportunities for you to be able to advance your own comfort in this space. And it doesn't have to be anything incredibly academic. It can be simply about just going to different places and activities, that maybe you hadn't frequented before. So that's what I could offer up.
Thank you. Yeah, what I hear you say is don't put a ton of pressure on yourself to have those hard conversations with folks right away. Spend time with them in ways that are meaningful and connect and find ways that you're more the same than different. And then, it'll grow from there. Thank you. That's really impactful. So you talked a lot about unlearning to then learn, resisting the urge to disconnect, and all these things that we should be thinking about in this work as well. Do you have any tips on how do you continue to do this over time, especially with where we are now as a society and there's so much information out there and so much coming at us all the time?
Yeah, I think, I've been challenged myself, and to be honest with you, Megan, about shutting off flows of information, because sometimes you have to almost press a reset because we get so much information all the time. We have access to everything. It seems like, and so while you're getting a lot of this information, I think we need to spend more time processing what we currently have and the state of where we're currently at. So, so again, going back to sort of my first response is when we think about what we have right now, for instance, if we wanted to take on police reform and reimagining law enforcement, I would ask the question and want to know about the lived experience of community members within our area that have experienced over policing. One of the first things that I wanted to do to understand my background actually starts within juvenile justice, and I worked around gang prevention and how do we intervene with gangs, was going into our youth development centers and detention centers to talk to young people to understand their experiences, to just listen to them. And again, it was listen to understand because I recognized that I was going to be in a position to influence policies, to influence practices, and to develop programs to support their rehabilitation. But I couldn't get to that space, and all this information that's coming in without resetting and just being centered around who's being impacted. And that became something that was valuable to me. And that really helped to shape and inform how I was to go about the work. So again, there's a lot of, things that we think that we know. There's a lot of things that, folks may be challenging in relationship to how history played out. We can say we can get right into the scholarship. Dr. Moore talked about that. We can get into the library and get into the scholarship of it. But I would say I would ask for you to all to center our community members. Keep them in mind, keep them as the end goal to determine how we actually go about creating true race equity. Does that make sense, Megan?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. It kind of relates. I wanted to also ask you something that we've talked about as a core team quite a bit, and we've adopted, even in the title of this around, you mentioned privilege is not a dirty word, and we talked a little bit about that. And I think you set it up really well and grounded us all with that privilege exercise. And I think that word, a lot of folks hear and maybe get defensive right away. And as you mentioned, there's so much information out there. And so sometimes it's easy to get defensive when there's so much coming at you in the way that it's being said sometimes. But we've had some other folks, talk to us about using the word white advantage or things as well as we talk about this, not even just from a white perspective, as you mentioned, but just advantage in general when we're thinking about power and privilege. And I didn't know if you had any more. I mean, you mentioned too, well-intentioned people create inequities every day, and us in government with the power and privilege we have to make decisions.
Yes.
How are you going about that in Wake County, or what can you share with us as staff in the city and folks that are on boards and commissions and folks that are in leadership roles or other privilege and power they have in our community to help us make a difference?
I love that question because, I tend to want to start with data. I tend to always want to lean on disaggregating the numbers when we talk about different things that we want to do. Once you disaggregate the data and disaggregate the number, and we talk about inclusive prosperity, to become truly inclusive in our prosperity, we have to understand where the gaps are, who's not being prosperous, and then ask why. And part of that is about understanding the data to define why we are going to spend and allocate our resources towards equity. Now, defining equity, now just in construct, equity is just about removing a barrier or building a bridge. I mean, but to build a bridge or remove a barrier, that means you have to understand the problem. You have to really root yourself in the challenge in itself. So at the county level, and I know the work that the city of Raleigh is doing and other municipalities, is understanding the challenges that exist, disaggregating that data and seeing if we have an overrepresentation of our Black and Brown residents being impacted by said policy or practice, or being impacted by not having the opportunity to be as prosperous or for upward mobility as other residents. And then being actively engaged and having conversation with those with the lived experiences to say, before we have these conversations, before we push back this policy or this practice, what are we missing? Help me understand. So again, there's not a cookbook method. I wish that I could say, just add a couple eggs and some flour here and some vanilla extract, and you will have the perfect brownie. I wish I could say that. But what I want to do is to offer you all, and this is for my white brothers and sisters, is to, be present in this conversation. Okay. Just be present. We brought in at one point into our region, Matthew McCarthy, who's the CEO of Ben & Jerry's. And he's a white CEO, white male CEO, that if you think about Ben & Jerry's, they're synonymous to social justice, right? I mean, you think about that good ice cream, they also want you to know that they are engaged in their community. They're engaged in some pretty potent corporate social responsibility around race equity and around privilege, and also a myriad of other things. But one of the messages that resonated with me as he talked to his counterparts, we brought him in to also work with our CEOs in our community, is to not wait to become an expert in any of this conversation around race equity. Do not wait to become an expert, and to be present in the conversations of others that are talking about this challenge, and resist the urge to debate their struggle. Resist the urge to want to present why you think they're struggling. So I want you to be present. For my Black and Brown brothers and sisters, I want to extend to you and ask that you extend to others is grace. Again, understanding that well-intentioned people create inequities every day, and that we're going to move this thing forward. While I feel weary in this space, I am representing as a Black male in this space, I feel weary. And sometimes I do not feel responsible for your learning. I have to have grace because we're all walking this together. I have to be patient in this space as people catch up. It was easy. I'm not Michael, Megan, I'm not gonna lie to you. It's tough. It's tough. I sit with elders, that are in their 90s, and some of the stories that they share about their experiences. And you think about during the civil rights era, when my mother was one of four young ladies who were asked to integrate the New Bern High School. There were four Black girls asked to be the first to integrate the high school. The community members, the Black community, basically sat in the back of a church after a Wednesday prayer meeting, and they strategized around the best way to integrate, and knowing that it had to happen. Integration, they had a choice to go stay at the Black high school. But the elders in that community said that we're not getting the same resources, so we have to do this. Black families didn't want to. I'm not going to send my kids there. They're going to be victimized. They're going to be traumatized. Parents were like, no, I'm keeping them in the Black school. At least I know that they'll be safe. And my grandfather, along with the other elders, said, we have to do it. And so they didn't pick the four smartest kids. They didn't pick the four most astute kids. They picked the 4 toughest kids in the community because these are the kids that they knew can handle their own if they were to be attacked. And they strategically said we wanted to make sure that we pick not boys, but we wanted to pick young ladies. Because you know why? It's harder to attack a young lady. And that was their mentality. And they made sure that the girls every single day of school, they wore their Sunday dresses. Because again, it's the imagery that they were fighting against. Going back to what Dr. Moore in terms of those savages, they were fighting that imagery. So it's tough to want to continue on and have conversations to help folk get to a place of where I am saying, please see me. That's tough. So be patient with me. I will continue to have grace. Brown and black brothers and sisters continue to have grace. My white brothers and sisters continue to be present. I am here for it. And I'm gonna tell you, this community is on fire about this work. Truly on fire about this work. And I feel honored to be in this conversation and this journey with you all. I truly do.
Thank you so much, Danya. You brought some really great imagery to this, I think, for sure, and talked about some of those implicit bias that we're still dealing with today that they were playing to when they integrated the schools in that way as well. Michael, do we have time for one more question? I know we're close on time.
Yes, you can ask one more.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to bring up, you brought up, and I think Dr. Moore was speaking to this already too, about you brought up the elders and how important it is for us to learn from our past, as Dr. Moore was saying, and then also talked about, youth and how much youth are the future of where we're going, and obviously have been for a long time the folks that have made changes happen, as your example is there too. I wondered if you had any other thoughts on how we young folks involved in this movement and the change that we're having happen here now as well. I know I always think they like to listen to youth better than hearing me talk about my topics as well.
Well, I think it was Sir Isaac Newton that said, if I can see further, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And I am in full blown preparing my shoulders to be stood on. And I feel as if, I don't feel as if this is young people, that's where it's at. And our young people are growing up in the most diverse and inclusive time of our country's history. And so when I think about my 16-year-old son and my 17-year-old nephew and the conversations they are having about how they view themselves as Black in America and how they view themselves as a Black male in America and how they view themselves with their friends and their circle. And I see their conversations about, them not even being able to fathom what slavery looked like or felt like. They are looking at how do we advance? How do we move forward? How do we not let race be a barrier? Now, and from their mindset, they may not see, because they never experienced race being a predictor of success. They may have not seen it physically, right? So there's this part of the equation where I think we need to continue to educate our young people about race equity, but not douse out their fire and enthusiasm around how we move forward. And where our young people have all the civil rights movements have all been pretty much, you're talking about, and we celebrated MLK's birthday yesterday, and you talk about him being 39 years old, but his advocacy started in his early 20s. And, you think about the power and the fervor of young people to make change. We have to ride that wave. We truly do, because they're going to be the implementers of said work in the future. So we have to make sure that they're included in all conversations, and also understand that, these young people are making decisions about where they work, where they play, what they invest their money in, based upon the characteristics of a company around DEI, around inclusion. They don't want to be associated with an organization that's not inclusive. They don't want to work over. We had a conversation with some young students from some of our great universities in the community, and they talked about, and I love this quote they said, they talked about, it is about meaning over money. meaning over money. So in other words, they were making decisions about what their purchasing power and where they are going to work. It was about what you represented as an organization before I invest my time, talent, skills over how much money you can offer me as a salary, which should tell us a lot about where those young people's heads are, which I love. I'm riding that wave. I truly am. I want to pour as much as I can historically into some of the nuances that they just don't have privy to. They're not privy to those nuances because they don't have the same lived experience, just like I did not have the lived experiences of my 90-year-old aunt, when I sat down and I talked with her. So, but it was her role to pass it down to me, and I have to now pass it down to my son and my nephew and those community members. And a part of that is also how do we engage in mentorship? I would advocate for mentorship 24/7, connecting with young people, being able to pour and invest in them and their livelihood. That is one of the most amazing experiences that you can have, is to be able to mentor a young person, not just inside your family, but also outside of your family.
Thank you so much. Yes, there are so many good thoughts there for what we can do, and the good things for us to think about in the county and the city as well as how we continue this work. And I think we see a lot of folks wanting to come to work knowing that we have these important programs around equity going on in the county and the city as well. Well, Dr. Moore and Danya, thank you so much for joining us today. What a great way to kick off our week of equity celebrations and really help ground us and make us give us some inspiration to continue this work that is not easy. Thank you so much for everything you do in the community. Really appreciated spending this time with you.
Yes.
Okay, get back to Michael.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. I second those sentiments. Thank you, Dr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Danya Perry. You both have been phenomenal today and really honing in what we were setting out to do. I'm very intent on bringing this to fruition, and I cannot really thank you both immensely from the bottom of my heart. I also want to thank our Assistant City Manager, Evan Raleigh, our Deputy City Manager, Tansy Hayward, and our City Manager, Marshall Adams David, who have been very intricate and very key players in us moving all things equity and inclusion here within the city of Raleigh. And I think all three of you tremendously. And I know we have Evan and Tansy both on as our attendees, but I just want to send my accolades out to you both. And I thank you so much. Also, I do not want to forget my lovely planning committee. I know they were hiding in the background, but I got to bring some type of recognition to them, because without them, there would be no me, and then there would be no town hall. So I would like to thank Letitia Holmes, Megan Anderson, Lisa Utsumi, Maisha Williams, Travis McCullum, Charles Craig, and Demetrius Edwards. I thank you all for your help, for your push, your encouragement, your support, the late night calls, the emails, whatever it took to pull this off. I thank you all immensely. And one last thing before we break for today, I want to share one last thing. Everybody can see. Everybody see?
Yep, you're good.
I'm good. Okay. Just to reiterate, be intentional. What is learned here lives here. We have learned a wealth of information on today, and we want you to take that information and we want you to share it, spread it, get involved in the community. I know Mr. Perry had dropped the organization abetterwake.com. Please join. Dr. Moore has initiatives that I know she's working on. Shaw University is right up the street. And if you want to learn more or to get involved, to take some educational or continuing ed courses for the history, just to bring your knowledge up, she will be a great resource for you to help. And as well as the Department of Equity and Inclusion, I cannot forget to thank them as well too. They have been instrumental and key. We thank their support for helping us put this on today. Also, today is also the National Day of Racial Healing, and you can visit healourcommunities.org for more information. And don't forget tomorrow, if you have not registered for tomorrow's session, it's just going to be even more impactful with Dr. Audria Caesar who is the CEO of Diversity and Inclusion from UNC Health. She will be sharing tomorrow Race as We See It Through a Health Lens, and you do not want to miss it. It's going to be a phenomenal session as well. And this is the city's first racial equity week. I was also tasked with spearheading this week. You can visit RaleighNC.gov for more details. For those that are internal employees, you can go to CoreCon and you can find that information. But just to highlight some of the events that we have the Social Equity Book Club with Human Relations Commission tomorrow evening. So please join us for that. We will have an art display in the Raleigh Municipal Building for the Latina and the Latinx community with art display. So if you have a chance in your busy schedule, you can go to RMB and you can see those displays there. And on Friday, Parks, Recreation, Cultural Resources Center will be holding the Black History Trolley Tours. There will be 5 different sessions, and more information is on our website at RaleighNC.gov as well too, so you can join there. There's a lot that's going on this week, but I thank each and every one of you for your time today. I thank you for your participation, your involvement, your engagement to help pour this. This is my first time leading a town hall. I can't tell you how much nerves I had in the background, but I'm so appreciative of everyone's support and your love. I'm looking forward to being connected and to be engaged and help partner and to stem these conversations. I kind of have some things in the works and the brewing as well too. So I look forward to more partnership. And again, Danya and Dr. Moore, I thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You will be receiving something special from us whenever it comes in the mail. we know COVID and the delays, it delays certain things, but you would definitely be receiving a token of our expression from us, the planning community, the city of Raleigh as a whole. And we thank you. We thank each of you for your participation, and have a great one.